Hello everyone and welcome to our third Equality Talk. Today we have Linnea Harrison with us. She's presenting for us equality in projects and teams. She's previously a world builder at EA Dice and now she's a creative director at Neat Corporation. Hello Linnea.
Hi. How's it going?
It's going good. How about you? Can you see and hear me?
Yeah, I can. It's pretty good over here. It was snowing earlier, so I'm a little skeptical about this Swedish weather we're getting.
Yeah, that's catastrophic. All right. Well, that's all I have to say. Actually, you can start presenting.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So hi everybody. As Emma mentioned, I'm Linnea Harrison, and she did a really great job presenting me. So I feel a little bit bad about doing this again, but I always love to talk about myself and hear the sound of my own voice. So I'm going to tell you some more about me. So as she mentioned, I used to work at DICE as a world builder. I've always been interested in computers and tech and interactive media and creating experiences for people, the whole shebang. I got started with a passion in board game design and statistical analysis and specific programming languages for handling a lot of large amounts of data. And so I was working originally for the Center of Analysis and Risk, and they had some very old virtual reality headsets, which I got like mind blown away by, and it always like sat there in the back of my head. I then went on to work on large franchises like Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, Battlefield, before finally making my way to work on Mirror's Edge, which was a dream of mine. And now, as mentioned, I work at the VR studio Neat Corporation, where we work with virtual reality because that's always sat in my head as like something super exciting. So I love working on the forefront of technology. And I never kind of imagined that I would end up being like a spokesperson, I don't know what you want to call it, for diversity or inclusion or minorities or women in tech or women in games. But here we are. Turns out I do care a lot about that, about minorities, and I didn't realize just how much I did until I kind of realized what I was missing out on, if that makes sense, right? Like you don't know that the grass is greener until you've experienced the other side. And so when moving to Sweden, I sort of, for the first time, started being in spaces where I wasn't just the woman in the meeting room, where previously it had been like assumed that I would take notes during the meeting because I was the woman who was there. So the secretarial role often goes to women, or that, you know, I looked so young because I wasn't a man who could grow a beard. And that was what a lot of the younger men who entered the games industry did very quickly to be taken seriously and seen as older. And of course, I don't have the right hormones to grow a beard, try as I might. But so it was tough to be taken seriously or seen as more senior or an expert, and that kind of started getting to me once I moved to Sweden. And I'm not going to say it was like night and day. There were still a lot of the same cultural underlying issues when I moved to Sweden, but there were less explicit demonstrations of those cultural tendencies and old school thinking of reliance on patriarchal forms. So it just kind of like kickstarted these ideas in my head of like, well, why is it like this? What direction is it going? What can we do as game developers? Why should we care and make it different than it is? Why should someone else care about my experience? And I think, well, obviously all of you are already here listening to this webinar, so I think you're way better off than most of the people who I would like to be trying to convince. But I think I'm going to try instead to provide all of us here with a vocabulary, an arsenal, if you will, of information and like the why behind and the how of like how do we practically start affecting change, and what kind of not arguments, but what kind of information and reasoning do people who aren't invested in diversity and inclusion from the get-go, what kind of reasoning and logic and proof do they require in order for this to be something that they would also be invested in changing? So I want to take us through a little bit of a journey before I get into the practical stuff, and just talk really quickly about why I think video games in themselves are important, and why I think video games are what we need to be investing more time in, more resources in, and why we need to be playing more video games. Before I jump into this, I just wanted to give a big shout out to both Jane McGonigal and Lisette Titre McCarthy, I think is her last name. And they are both like fierce warriors in this information race in terms of understanding why diversity and inclusion is important to not just games, but tech in general. So a lot of the data and information I've taken in my presentation is from them, and then also inspired by them with a lot of the work that I do. So video games, right? A lot of people say they're just video games. It's a waste of time, right? And I obviously disagree, because I work with video games and I spend my life in video games, and I'm the type of person that cares about the problems of the world and issues plaguing mankind today, and I'm a very empathetic person, so it seems silly that I would waste my life or my time on something that is just a game. So I started digging into why I think games are important. And I think one of the big reasons that games, that we will never regret playing good games, is because games consistently provide us with the 4 ingredients that make for a happy and meaningful life. They provide us with satisfying work. They provide us with a real hope for success, strong social connections, and a chance to become part of something bigger than ourselves. Right? They provide us with those. We get those benefits sometimes from our real lives, like in bits and pieces, little chunks here and there, but we get them almost every single time we play a really good video game. And these benefits are what positive psychologists call intrinsic rewards. That is, we don't play games to make money or improve social status, achieve external signposts of success, and so on. We do it for inner rewards, intrinsic rewards. And studies at University of Pennsylvania, Berkeley, and Harvard have shown that they provide the foundation for what they call the optimal human experience, but basically it's a happy and meaningful life. So it's pretty amazing that the time that we spend, if you're looking for like, what is the meaning of life, right? And if one of those purposes, one of those goals is to have a happy and meaningful one, then you get many of those ingredients, so to speak, or components or factors from playing really good games, really well-designed games. That's massive to me. So I started looking into, because I really love being able to throw all these studies in people's faces whenever they parents come talk to me and they're like, games are corrupting our kids and violence and this and that. And I'm like, well, people have had these arguments about every media form for ages, right? Like, books are corrupting our kids. Let's ban all these books. Movies are horrible. They're wasting away their brains. Netflix and television, whatever media form it is, there will always be a fear of it corrupting us or pulling us into darker habits. And media and anything that you engage with or consume obviously has that potential, but I think the difference here is being able to differentiate between well-designed games and poorly designed games, or games that are designed to bring these positive intrinsic rewards, and games that take advantage of, our dopamine reaction and those kinds of things. So differentiating between the two, I think, is a key step. So I always like to throw a bunch of studies at them. I have a bunch more where these came from, but these are usually the usual ones where I'm like, well, but studies also show that games have a big positive influence on people as well, right? For instance, playing video games with your family is proven to create a stronger family bond and improve behavior in children. Playing video games together is proven to increase your trust in each other and enhance your relationships. Video games are proven to reduce stress and are even prescribed as treatments for reducing depression and anxiety. And interacting in virtual space helps build social behaviors, empathy, and respect. Video games are proven to increase neural growth and to encourage creativity and problem solving, especially with young children. So what am I trying to say? Well, basically, I'm trying to say that more people should be playing games, right? In order to practice all these good behaviors, all these good habits, all these good ways of thinking, we need more people to play more games, right? That's what I'm trying to say. I'm saying if you play a lot of video games, you can help save the world. And I don't think I'm crazy by saying that. Let me explain a little bit about what I'm trying to get at. So if you've ever played a game or know someone who has, then you probably recognize this emotion or this face. This is a face of excitement and anticipation, intense focus, urgency, maybe a little bit of fear. That she has intense concentration and a deep focus in this point. She has a sense of optimism and surprise, right? This is someone who is on the verge of what we in the video game industry call the epic win. The epic win is a really cool concept that I think we need to bring to other industries. The epic win is an outcome so extraordinarily positive that you didn't know it was possible until you achieved it. It's this overwhelming sensation of, I did it. I absolutely did it. It's beyond the point of imagination until you reach that point. And this is what I believe we need to see more of in the real world. This is what the world is missing in order to solve the greatest problems plaguing us. But we're not as good people as we are in the real world as we are in video games, right? In the real world, we need to be motivated to do something that matters, and we need to be inspired to collaborate. But in video games, we become better versions of ourselves. We get up after failure and we try again. In the real life, we don't always feel that way. We often feel overwhelmed, frustrated, depressed, even cynical. But you don't get those feelings when you play well-designed video games. So if we look at video games, we notice a few things. When we first enter the world, we meet hundreds of characters, all willing to trust us with their most dire needs and difficult challenges. They ask us to help. In a good game, we feel blissfully productive. We have clear goals and a sense of heroic purpose. More importantly, we're constantly able to see and feel the impact of our efforts on the virtual world around us. See and feel our impact on the world around us. That's huge. How often do you feel like you're doing the right thing, but you don't see the benefit of it? I know for myself right now, staying and working at home is one of the most important things I can do to help society at large, to help mankind's survivability at large. But I don't see that effect. I don't see that happening. It's so distant and so disconnected from me. I completely understand how people get frustrated and feel like them staying at home isn't making a difference and therefore don't feel like it's as worthwhile. I totally get it. It's because we're not getting that feedback from the rest of the world that you can instantly see the effect that your efforts are having, right? So in video games, we're able to see and feel the impact of our efforts around us. And as a result, we have a stronger sense of our own agency, that if I do something, it has impact, it has meaning. The cool thing is that studies show that if we practice this habit in video games of being ambitious, setting goals, and seeing the results and the effects of them, that behavior translates to the real world. So the more we get good at doing that in video games and practice those behaviors, the more likely we are to set ambitious real-life goals. When we play, we also have a sense of urgent optimism. We believe wholeheartedly that we're up to any challenge, and we become really resilient in the face of failure, right? Research shows that gamers spend on average, 80% of our time failing in game worlds. 80% of our time, right? But instead of giving up, we stick with it. We stick with the challenge, right? Because we know that the game is designed to be winnable. We know that there's feedback designed into the game system to tell us what it is we need to be improving upon, what we need to learn about in order to succeed. We know that success is possible. With some effort, I think we can learn to apply this resilience to real-world challenges as well. But I don't think it's super easy or super obvious how we should do that. I think we're just in the beginning phases of learning how to do that. And we're stumbling upon some moments where we've discovered this happening, but I don't think it's like a textbook or a cookie cutter case where we know exactly how to design for resilience in real world situations. I want to give you an example. When Katie Stone, a friend of mine, Perez's daughter, first tried to ride a two-wheel bicycle, the little girl took her Super Mario plush toy and put him in the basket on the front of the handlebars. Intrigued, my friend Katie asked why it was important that Nintendo's iconic plumber accompanied her on the ride. She said, "Because he taught me to never give up." This is what we need more of. This is what we need in the real world, right? But we can't engage more audiences to be empowered and feel invincible, to believe in the epic win, and to keep trying in the face of failure without games that appeal to their stories, that reflect their experiences, and are entrenched and enriched by their culture. Right? Games have historically been portrayed and built by one very similar demographic of game developer, right? And that trend has come and gone. We have all these stories that we come up with, like, oh, but what about these women programmers? What about these women game developers? And yes, they are wonderful, they are amazing. But the fact still remains that historically, through our very short and small history of video game industry, a primarily large portion has been built by a very similar demographic. So how do we motivate studios to change if they're not personally invested in the cause, right? Like if they themselves are not a minority of some type, why should they put effort into making space for them? Why should they keep fighting more than once? Why should they do anything except saying, yeah, that sounds good, and then not actually change much, right? Because that's what happens so often. Studios, companies, leaders will often sit and talk about change. And I got really tired of in the US and then a little bit in Sweden, this thing that I started calling like diversity salad. There's these, like, you start getting invited to these lunches at large corporations, and I won't name them because you never know who your new friends are going to be and who's trying to change to be better now. But I would always get invited to these lunches and they'd say like, oh, well, we want to have a diversity lunch and talk about diversity and how we can increase inclusivity. And it would often be, okay, you're invited to lunch, everyone gets a salad, it's all these women sitting in a room, and you sit down and talk, and then nothing really changes, nothing really happens out of that. Some portion of a budget somewhere was spent on buying salads and renting a space, but what does that accomplish except for a short dopamine response, right? Maybe bringing people together helps empower them. Maybe that starts a plan, but more often than not, any planning or any solutions that came out of those meetings were never really invested in or believed in by meaningful leadership that could actually affect change, or groups that had any sort of power to affect change, because there was no goal, there was no driving motivation. So I want to take a little break to provide some data on like why studios should be invested, why companies should care, small and large should care about hiring diversely and making sure their space is inclusive in order to empower and support those diverse or minority developers and members. That's when I start using the money argument. So in order to look at this argument, let's take an example from not video game industry, but from the film industry. Black Panther is a great example. I hope you've all seen it. It's a brilliant movie. It's really great. After it released in that year, it was the third highest grossing film in US history. Third highest grossing film ever in US history. Not box office, not anything, just total gross profit in the US history. This does not include DVD or Blu-ray sales. But the thing is, it had limited licensing at launch. Not a lot of toy licensing, and it didn't even have a game, which a lot of the other Avengers films did. A lot of other big blockbuster films had. Didn't even have a mobile game. It wasn't even like a major part of mobile games that featured. There was like an Avengers themed match, I think it was like a match 5 game or something at the time that had like a Black Panther character, but they didn't even do like a special promotional thing when the movie came out or like linking it in any way. But it was still the 3rd highest grossing film in US history. Blew everyone out of the water. Marvel was not expecting this. They were extremely happy with its success, and they were like, what happened? Well, it all happened because Nate Moore was in the room during the executives planning their next lineup of films leading up to Infinity War. So they were planning, okay, what movies do we line up leading up to Infinity War? How do we buffer and pad these years? And Nate Moore said, what about Black Panther? Right? And that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't have been in the room, if he hadn't have brought it up. Black Panther would have never been made. More so, he was able to then make sure that he put diverse creatives in key positions to create the film so that the end product would be made by people who would reflect the material itself. If it weren't for them, this game would have been a flop and been thrown away as a diversity cell, similar to a recent games marketing ploy that some of you might have heard of, which I also want to talk about a little bit. I also want to name the next billion players, which is something that gets thrown around in especially the mobile games market quite a lot. We currently have 2.2 billion active gamers in the world, according to Newzoo's global games market portfolio. We expect an additional 1 billion gamers to come online by the end of 2020. That's this year. But they're coming from emergent countries, which means they have a high number of connected users joining the internet with stable internet speeds and a viable enough economy that allows for a large portion of people to afford smartphones and PCs. This means that $116 billion are at stake from emerging countries, right? And data shows that when you get a new phone, the first thing people install is always a communication app. The second thing that is always installed by the numbers is a game. Second app that's always installed. And like, who goes around with one app? No one. Everyone installs a game. The question is, what game are these people going to be installing? $116 billion are up at stake from these emerging countries. And that's on top of the $108 billion annual dollars currently. So what I'm trying to say is, if you do not have a diversity strategy, you do not have a growth strategy, right? All of these users are coming online. All of these gamers are coming online. And if you do not have a product that speaks to them in a meaningful way, like Black Panther did, to a new demographic, to a new target audience, you're not going to succeed, right? You're not going to get those sales. And you can't just like, throw in a new character or throw in a different backstory without actually backing it up with having some sort of like cultural sensitivity or representation on your team for understanding what the struggles actually are, for understanding what the stories actually are. And that's my biggest recommendation for game developers today is like, don't tell stories that are other people's stories. Tell your story, because otherwise it's just going to be extremely non-authentic, right? And people aren't going to connect with that. So it's really important to have a product that reflects the strategy of being genuine and of being representative of these diverse users, right? So you need to have a strong diversity strategy that, again, like in Black Panther, they had diverse creatives that represented the product being made in a really important way. They also had a Swedish composer, which is pretty cool. Can be a little bit proud there. So I don't know if y'all can get my desktop audio. I'm hoping you can. You probably can't though. But if you can't hear this, I will talk over it anyways. This ad starts off really strong. And they're talking a lot about, women as inventors, women as creators, strength behind that. looking at new ideas that can come into the picture thanks to these new perspectives being taken. The weird thing, though, is that if we look at what this is actually marketing, no. It's actually marketing the new Miss Monopoly board game, which, like, is not inherently a bad product necessarily, but if you look at the actual product development, they've basically just slapped a new sticker on it and said, oh, it's the young niece of Mr. Monopoly, and she's picked herself up by her bootstraps, and she's a self-made entrepreneur. So now you can be inspired as a young woman inventor, as a young woman creative, as a young woman business entrepreneur or whatever by her accomplishments, which doesn't really have a meaningful tie-in to the franchise, doesn't really have a meaningful tie-in to the mechanics, to the content of the game, to the decisions that the player's actually making in the moment. Like, there's nothing from that story that's actually relevant to the marketing being done. And that's why this is one of the biggest current flops of marketing to diverse groups with a diversity strategy that didn't take into consideration having, creatives that represented the target demographic from the get-go. So now we've seen what a successful campaign can look like, a successful product, and an unsuccessful one, and we know what's at stake, right? So we can make that argument. So with all of this information, what can we do? How can we actually make a difference? That's what I'm here to talk about, because it's a tough question and it's something I've wrestled with a lot throughout my career. What can I do? Well, if you're on a hiring team and part of hiring or in any portion related to hiring, try to make sure there are diverse people in the applicant pool that are being considered for the role. People who sound, think, and look different from you, people who come from different places than you do. Just interview them, talk to them. Sometimes you'll be surprised by the knowledge and strength in different skill sets that they bring that you have been trying to find for a really long time, but because you've been looking in the same hiring pool, it's been seen as a very rare skill set, but it's actually quite common in other groups and other circles. Just go looking, spend the time. It's not easy, it's not cheap, but it is always worth it. If you're working on a project as a developer, voice your questions. Ask if there's a way to make the game more accessible, more inclusive. Ask about more representation from the leadership team or consultants who could represent a more diverse audience. If you are in the leadership team and constantly feel like there are not qualified people who represent diverse minorities that are ready to take on leadership roles, mentor them. Take some on. Many of these skills can be taught. A road can be created, a path can be forged together if you work on it. And often they will come with much stronger skill sets, again, in an area that you normally have to spend a long time teaching to your majority developers. If you're a student, make games that reflect your story, your journey, what's unique to you. Try not to repeat and echo the stories that have been told a million times, like The Matrix or Miyazaki or Disney, or video games that you've played before. Draw from your own world and experiences. Now we're going to get to the practical examples, stuff that we are doing in the games industry portion of the talk. Actionable, practical stuff. Feel free to write any of this down. Well, anything beforehand too, but this stuff is actually useful information. Check. So what are we doing? What is being done? Well, I'm part of a lot of different initiatives to increase diversity within the games industry in Sweden, in the nonprofit sector and in the studio that I work at. The first one I think that makes good differences is Game Changers. The Game Changers organization is not super over the top, formal, structured. It's just like, it's like a voting. It's like when you say I voted and you get the little sticker to like prove participation, right? Studios that believe in making a difference, changing the game, you know, it's a cute logo. It's a cute phrase. That believe in making a difference, in investing in it, come forward, put their name on it, and say, yes, we stand for this. We are working towards this. We may not be perfect, but we're trying. And let's try together. Let's share together. These studios are working together with our Women in Games Stockholm group, with Game Dev Force nonprofit, with Dataspelsbranschen, who I'm sure many of you recognize. And a lot of these organizations and these studios come together for workshops or help sponsor other initiatives. It's a pool of resources for anyone that has time and energy to invest in, to know where their energy is worthwhile spent. It also helps indicate to potential new hires that are within diversity and minority groups who is actually willing to put up some effort. Again, not to say that these companies are necessarily perfect or have figured everything out, but you know, there's a difference between the ones that are putting in effort and trying to show that they're putting in effort to the ones that do very little. The next thing that we have done are the Intro to Games nights for women. I had this idea, this like hunch, this theory that there were already talented, skilled women with the skill sets that we need, with the knowledge and experience that we need, but they weren't working in games. They were working in other industries, or they didn't have those skills as part of their career track, but rather as part of a hobby, right? There are so many women maker spaces. There are so many like nerdy sci-fi groups for women that are doing DIY projects that are really techy. There are so many gamer groups for women that focus on bringing women together around creativity and technology. And if that isn't already really strong building blocks for making games, I don't know what is. Expecting someone to have had 5+ years of experience with Unreal Engine, or being able to, you know, use exactly your 3D modeling tool, like, you know, having 2+ years experience with Maya modeling, doesn't mean that they aren't already really skilled at sculpting and modeling. Maybe they've done so with a different medium in clay or with a different software of their choice. All of these people, I don't know if you guys have looked at the PlayStation Dreams being made by Media Molecule, but there's so many creatives there that are crafting really insane, talented, technically proficient games and worlds using hardware. I'm just like, why aren't we just straight hiring all of these people on PlayStation, many of whom are women, that are creating all of this content already in what is arguably a game engine? And it has much more frustrating tools than our modern game engines. I'm sure they would love to be introduced to that and get paid for it. That would probably be pretty awesome. I think there's also a lot of other spaces we can look at, like the number of Excel sheets to figure out exact blooming patterns of crossbreeded flowers in Animal Crossing, and how to min-max the space in order to propagate the highest probability. Like, these women are solving technical problems with technology and systems for creative outlets already. They are so talented, they are so skilled, they are working together, they're communicating with each other, and these are skill sets that we kill for in the games industry, that we work really hard with a lot of our majority representative developers to foster the ability to communicate, the ability to work together. It doesn't come for free, but culturally, if you look at minority groups, they are much stronger in those soft skill sets, which is honestly like a big win for a lot of studios. And one of the things that we did learn from the Intro to Games nights is that these women do exist in other fields, other jobs, other hobbies, other communities. But the problem is that so far our studios and our schools haven't been looking at those spaces for hiring or for recruiting. because our practices haven't really changed to reflect our desire to have a diverse team, a diverse like creative set. So that's something that can easily change, right? Go find Facebook groups for maker spaces and post a job ad there. Be much more open to the idea of hiring someone who doesn't fit the cookie cutter bill of who's been there in the past, because you don't want to hire someone who looks like the people that have been there in the past. You want to hire someone different and new. And that means having an open mind to someone who doesn't necessarily look like they have the skill sets you're looking for, but who can maybe show or talk to you about their growth potential in those areas. Like, there's a lot of potential. One good example of this is there was a Google hiring kerfuffle, if you want to call it that, where they had trained for a while an AI on data sets of previously hired high-performing engineers at Google, so they could then recruit and try to find new high-performing engineers. But what didn't happen was there was no curation of the data set that was being fed to the AI. And so the AI was actively selecting away people who had, president of the women's chess club. Nope, out of there. We've never had one of those before. Can't start having them now. That's not linked with the successful hiring rate. Now we need men's chess club. That has a much higher correlation to a successful hire. So the AI ended up being extremely sexist and extremely prejudiced against other minorities, which was ultimately the opposite of the intention. But because the data set, what it was learning from in the past, wasn't curated to reflect what was wanted in the future, it didn't know any better. And I would argue that the same is true for a lot of recruiters these days, is that, if we show them, like, this is who's at our studio now, find us more people like this, that's what we're going to get. We're going to get more people that are the same, similar. So we need to try as much as we can to be open to spending a bit more time front end, getting through very different types of, hiring pools in order to then reap the benefits of a much more diverse skill set in our team later on. It is cliche to say empowered women empower women, but it is true. We saw, again, with the Intro to Games night, one of the most empowering things was that there were many women that were in these hobby clubs for tech, Arduino, Raspberry Pi, makerspace stuff, tinkering with all kinds of little gadgets and things. And they were really excited about the idea of switching their careers into games, but it was always scary. But by having a group of representative leaders, women in different roles throughout game development there, to answer all their questions, show them that we can exist in this space, and we do, and we are creating space for you. We want you here with us. Empowered women empower women. We saw so many more women applying to game development schools successively the year after, and then linking back to and saying it was because of the Intro to Games night. So again, by creating a safe space where you can represent the possibility of what is already happening and what could be, you can get so many more people engaged in following this track into video games that we have, I think, mistakenly created as a very long funnel for people to work into games. Because again, it means that we're going to get much more people that are very similar. But hopefully that helps get more diversity and minority hires into those tracks, into those schools, into the studios eventually. One of the other things that we have spent a lot of time on is debunking this concept of like a woman programmer, or you are a woman animator, or you're a woman this, a woman that, women CEO, right? No, you're just a really good animator. You're just a really good CEO. Like, what makes you different can help inform your skill set, but that is not at this point a viable attribute that you need to be considering. What needs to be happening is that women need to be seen as experts in their roles first and foremost. And if being a woman is a strong part of their identity, that's up to them, that's up to the space and the community they're in, and the colleagues and friends that they have. But ultimately, in terms of your career, your expertise and your role are the most important. So we wanted to kind of create more spaces where women and other minorities could be seen as experts first and foremost. So we created these breakfast lectures here in Stockholm, which are hosted by studios. Again, the studios are part of the Game Changers program, so that was how we knew that studios were already invested in this. And the studios would host the space. They would often provide some breakfast snacks or coffee. Everyone loves coffee here, of course, and would provide the projector and like the equipment for doing the presentation, because like a lot of studios have meetings, so they have that equipment anyways. It doesn't really cost very much to have like an hour or two in the morning when they let a bunch of devs in. It also has the added bonus of then like kind of marketing that studio to all of these developers as, hey, we're investing in this, we're good guys, right? Like we're the good people. So the audience that was invited were all game developers. Anyone could come. Anyone could be in the audience if you were in some way related to the game development community or interested in it. So, you know, men, women, non-binary, students, veterans, seniors, everything everyone could attend. And that was really important in terms of not just highlighting for women how experienced and intelligent other women could be, but also for everyone to see that all of these breakfast lectures of highly talented, skilled people who I'm getting all of this really relevant and highly specific and very detailed information from, they'll just happen to be minorities, which again helps disprove that they are just minority hires or just diversity hires, but in fact, they're experts in their area. That's the most important thing, and that's what we should be seeing people as in general. Another initiative that we have going are these lunches for women in games. It's like a lunch club, and it started as a safe space to provide the safe space for women to get to know other women, because often if you're at a studio, a game dev studio, and you have, you know, percentages lower than 10% of the studio is women, like maybe you're the only woman on your team. For large portions of my career, I was the only woman on my team. And like big teams, like 50, 60, 70, 80 people, 100-person teams, and I was the only woman. Like you just stand up in a room and there's just a sea of not me, right? Like I don't feel myself reflected in anyone else on the team. And yeah, you're friends, but there creates like a very unconscious boundary in those situations where there's certain things that you just don't feel comfortable talking about, right? You have to kind of portray this screen of success and of being able to handle stuff, because if you are the only woman on a team, then you kind of represent women to the team. You represent the ability of all women, right? So there gets this like nagging voice in the back of your head, like I can't be vulnerable. I can't be, I can't be a human, basically. So you have to kind of represent this ideal of what women could be and how great they could be. And it's a lot of pressure to put on someone. And that happens anytime you have a minority in a large group, in a large team. And even if it's unintentional, it's a subconscious thing that tends to happen to a lot of minorities. So that was one of the big intentions with this lunch club. If you want minorities to feel connected within an industry, they need a safe space first and foremost. And then you need a way to bridge that space, right? So we had the lunches for our safe space for women, non-binary, anyone who identifies as a gender minority. And then we started bridging that gap with the breakfast lectures, right? Representing women as experts, representing minorities as experts. We still needed to find a way to empower women to feel extremely capable and extremely proud of their work in and of themselves, because so often when we work in games, we work on a team. So it's very easy to say, well, the team made this. And it's great to feel like you're part of a team and that a team can build something much bigger and more important. But I think it's also very important to celebrate your own successes, especially for cultural minorities who typically do not revel in their own success as much, sad as that may be. So for that, we created Valkyrie Jam. And this was the brainchild of Jenny Nordenborg, who's my boss at work. But she's also my dear friend and co-founder of the nonprofit that we run together with Kiemava, which is called Game Dev Force. And so Valkyrie Jam was her first initiative to help tackle this. And really, it brings together 12 women across the globe who are experts in game development, like, you know, women who are seniors at Blizzard, who have worked for like a decade at Microsoft and Riot and, you know, Guerrilla Games and CD Projekt Red and DICE and Mojang and you name it. There are stars that are not only applying but attending Valkyrie Jam, which was like a 2-week game jam for the teams to make two teams to make 2 games, and just feel like game developers, like they are the audio person on the team, they are the animator on the team, not they are the woman on the team. And I attended last summer, and let me just tell you, I was not expecting for it to overwhelm and move me as much as it did. I finally recognized and kind of understood, empathized with, or sympathized with many of the men that I know that start studios with their male or guy friends from college, their buddies that they get along with, that look like them, think like them, speak like them, because I felt like I had this sorority at Valkyrie Jam, and it was comfortable and it was easy. It was a breath of fresh air for me and for all of the women that attend. And I think anyone who sees photos of it and can see themselves in those people there, in those developers there, they get this breath of fresh air saying like a space like that can exist. And I'm not saying we should start making all of these studios that are all women, but I'm saying you kind of need to know what the other end of the spectrum is in order to know how far off from the middle we are right now. And that was kind of the big eye-opening thing about Valkyrie Jam. So thanks to that, we started making The Thing, which some of you may have heard of. It's a conference that we held in February here in Stockholm for game developers, by myself and Laura Belarka, organized it primarily, and Game Dev Force, the nonprofit organization. And we got help from several studios as well. But the idea was that it was a conference by game devs, for game devs, relevant talks, and we were gonna make sure that minorities felt welcome, not just welcome, but empowered and a sense of belonging. So in order to do that, I made sure that the start of the day was only for women and minorities. They owned the space. They had a breakfast, they had a panel just for them. They got to be in the space, hang out, take off their coats, get relaxed, get coffee, hang out there for a couple hours, and really feel like they had an ownership of this space. This was really key. This meant that the women were there and could immediately be seen, even if it's like small stuff, but they could be seen as experts in their area. They knew what the schedule was, so men were asking them what the schedule was. They knew who was speaking because they had already met more than half of the speakers, because again, we had made sure that the speaker list was, and the moderator list was, extremely diverse. So many of those diverse and minority people were at the breakfast. So all of the women attending already knew those people and had those connections. They became inspired as the amazing devs that they are. It's pretty wonderful. This encouraged and helped foster feelings of trust, collaboration, and confidence in self, which is really necessary for minorities to feel valued, a sense of worth and belonging within a community. White, cis, straight men get that feeling often by default, right? It's kind of culturally built in. Not all do, you know, that's, humans are humans, but culturally there's definitely a predisposition towards a feeling of belonging. all other minorities have to work for it. It's always something that you have to create space for. And many don't think the work is worth it. So we choose other areas, other bubbles, other spheres. So that's why we have these strategies to help administrators, directors, and leaders do the work for them, so we can help foster more inclusive workplaces. Moderation is key. Meetings need a moderator. I don't care if it's informal or that's not how your culture works, but a meeting moderator assigned at the beginning of the meeting or well beforehand so they can prepare helps you not only have agenda goal-based meetings, which are much more efficient, but also helps make minority voices who are often overlooked in social settings be heard. Safe spaces are really important. For the majority of white cis straight men, everywhere is their safe space. But for minorities, that safe space needs to be carved out. Some minority representatives are much more bold and feel confident standing strong within these spaces previously dominated by the majority of men. But many minorities are not comfortable with this. And although the argument of earning your spot comes in, it's not blind self-confidence we should be valuing in our industry, but rather empathy building, foresight planning, communication, and collaboration, skills that culturally are seen very often in minority groups, particularly in women. Each workplace, each school, each community faces different issues and is plagued by different exclusionary behavior. And identifying what's keeping your members from feeling included is always the first step to solving the problem. We use surveys and workshops to identify and solve these in our nonprofit and with any communities like schools or studios that we work with. We've also done these over the past few years, and we've seen improvements just from starting to include everyone in this task of identifying the issues. Culture isn't a trickle-down solution, it's an everyone working together solution. And at the very end of the day, there have to be consequences, right? If you claim to be an inclusive and welcoming institution, studio, workplace, or community, but you allow your star programmer, who also happens to be getting claims about harassing women from HR, for instance, if you allow that person to stay, then you're not an inclusive and welcoming space. Then you're actively choosing someone who is being exclusionary. There are often some tough choices and decisions to be made when it comes to choosing diversity and inclusion. It means making extra effort to find minority applicants where they feel safe, and then showing them that a safe space exists for them within your community as well. It also means making sure there are systems in place to identify what is making them feel excluded or unsafe, making sure there are official roles for moderation, support, inquiry, and then that there's actual consequences for breaking any actual rules about inclusion. Here's an example of ours for Game Dev Force that we use, our code of conduct. It's very simple and straightforward, but then we also spell out every single nuance of that, because the thing is, if you're vague in your code of conduct, you're not going to help anyone who doesn't understand the line to understand it better. Usually the people who are breaking the rules don't understand that they are. They don't think of themselves as being harassers. They don't think of themselves as being disrespectful, but because they haven't had the explicit act of what that means spelled out for them, they don't know. So a lot of people look at this and they say, oh, hey, I get it. These are the rules. Draw the line for people who do not understand where the line is drawn. Make sure people who are worried about others crossing the line know that you are very clear and very serious about where that line is drawn and exactly how you will deal with anyone violating it. At Neat Corporation, the studio I work at, we also decided to co-author a code of conduct as goals as a community between our developers, and we all agreed to it. We did this by creating a list of rules and guidelines that we voted and suggested on through an anonymous web survey and collated that into a prioritized list. If someone breaks these agreements, which has happened before out of habit or mistake, we work together to refer back to this and call each other out on it, since it's a joint agreement between all of us. With all that, I would like to say thank you so much, everybody, for taking your time and being invested and coming to this talk and caring about all of these issues, which are obviously very important to me, but aren't important to everyone. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Linnea. That was great.
Yay!
Really, really interesting. I have a few questions, and if anyone listening to this have questions, you can also ask in the Q&A. But I'll just start with mine. So, did you read the alumni form? Did you have the time to do that before?
I did. It was about a week ago now that I read it last. But yeah, I had a read.
All right. And what did you think about? I mean, the answers were some guys, some girls answering, and did you see any differences? Did you feel like?
I mean, I feel like a lot of the answers are speaking about beliefs that people have, which are relevant and need to be addressed, and often those beliefs come from a lack of information and communication, right? Beliefs about women's preferences and behaviors, which aren't always true. They're often historically inaccurate. So I think working hard to debunk those beliefs is definitely an important step forward.
Thank you.
It's not easy though.
No, of course. Oh, we have a question here. I have more questions, but we also have one here. Yeah, okay. Robert is asking, do you have examples of inclusive space?
Yeah, so for instance, the conference that we held, The Thing, that would be an inclusive space. And the reason it's an inclusive space is because we have defined how we do not allow and do not allow in or support people who are exclusionary, like who are creating feelings of discomfort. This was reinforced. We actually had one instance where we had to reinforce this, and that was someone was taking photos at the event, which is natural. But some of the minorities felt like they were being like targeted or picked on for more photos being taken of them and like more of their portrait, and they didn't feel comfortable with that. So, you know, we talked to the person and said, hey, we love that you're taking photos, but please only take big group pictures. Could you delete the ones that are like of specific people's portraits because they don't feel comfortable with that? We really appreciate it. And of course, everyone attending has said that they are willing to have their photograph taken. But again, it's about listening to people's concerns about not feeling safe or comfortable, and then addressing that very quickly and very explicitly, like very clearly. And that's again where our code of conduct comes into play. One of the biggest benefits we've seen from any of the workshops that we've done or any of the work that we've done with schools and studios is often that they have guidelines or rule books or like handbooks on what they think ideal behavior is. Like we try to work towards being inclusive, but actually spelling out what exclusionary behavior is, what is wrong, what is bad. Like, you know, if we're looking at the examples that we just had, you know, it's don't be respectful. Don't do something someone asks you not to do. Some people need that told to them, and in order to do that, you're creating this space where it's very clear what is okay and what is not okay. That creates an inclusive space.
Right. So I have another question. You talked about people who worry about gaming being a waste of time, and I was thinking, do you have any games in particular that we could talk to these people about? As an example, like, look at this. This is good stuff.
Yeah, I started developing a list a while back. Gosh, there's so many good games. I mean, I would look at the indie space first and foremost, whatever is winning large awards in the indie spaces, like at GDC or other game award spaces. So looking at Night in the Woods, A Short Hike, looking at Journey, or looking at building games like Minecraft or Stardew Valley, or there's just so many good games like Factoria, and like there's a super long list of really good games, and I'll have to make one now and publish it somewhere, won't I? So I can like link it.
You don't have to, but it would be great if you have good ideas. So we have another question, I think. Yeah. What do you believe is the most important rules of conduct at your workplace?
For us, we have three that I think are the most important. One is that everyone should respect the 6-hour workday that we have in place. And that one is like basically breaks down to don't pressure people to work overtime. Don't pressure people to work late or work hours that are not what they want. And that's also reflected in our other rule about trusting people to manage their own development schedule, right? Like unless we, like I'm part of the leadership team at my studio, and unless we have a reason to see that someone's not producing very efficiently, which has honestly never happened, or being very productive, then, you know, how they get that done, when they get that done is up to them, right? And there's no reason to think that I have the solution for their life, that I know better on how they should run their life than they do. Because I've hired them, because I've made sure that they are intelligent and responsible and capable people, and because we foster a culture of talking to each other about our problems. And when we feel like, oh, hey, I'm not having a really productive day today, and that's okay, because we trust each other to be invested in the same end goal, right? And that's kind of really key. And then the third rule that I would say is the most important for us is also like just to be kind. It's not one that needs a lot of reinforcing. We are by default very kind people. Like we kind of hire kind people first and skilled people second. And then it turns out that we end up with a really diverse workforce from that, because we're also finding applicants in diverse places. But just having that as a reminder is really strong, because I think if you bring kindness first and trust, that's the easiest thing to lose at a workplace. That's the thing that goes out the window the fastest, I think.
Right. You also talked about Black Panther, and I was thinking about the role models. Do you have any specific role models that have been meaningful to you?
I have a lot. I mean, I'd be a little cliche, but honestly, my mother is a big role model for me. And I think it's important also, like I think for a lot of women, and especially people from minority groups, they look to their family and members of their family for kind of the idea of what you can be, where you can go. And so her being tech enthused and empowering me to do that was also really important. I think I also I love any strong and rebellious character in a movie, video games, like you name it, I love it. It's I don't know, I have a really easy time liking characters and seeing myself in them and inspired by them.
Amazing. Yeah, me too. Okay, I think we're gonna have to end this now because we're already over time. But thank you so much for a great talk today.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, and if anyone has questions in the future, feel free to reach out to me on social media. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. My email is easy to find if you Google for it. Perfect.
You can also write, we're gonna post this on our Facebook, so you can write on the movie and we can connect you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is super exciting and fun.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Bye.